Good morning. I've had my coffee and it's a beautiful day here in North Carolina, so I'm ready to tackle joining the units, the two side units to the center panel of our Happy in the Mountains square. You may have watched us join the units on a king-size quilt, the Scrappy Happy Wave. And that was easy to do because we had lots of reference points. That design was made on a grid, so it was easy to line up things. So we don't have anything like that. What do we have? We have our original working drawing. This inside perimeter line is the finished edge of the quilt. So we're going to just fold this back on those lines that are the finished edge of the quilt. We'll finish that off. All right, now we did not square up this quilt before we're going to join these units. We're using our master working drawing. We've turned back the edges so that we have the finished edge of the quilt on the pattern. Now what we're going to do, it almost looks like panic time, but what we're going to do, the quilting shrinks the quilt up. So we're going to start here in the center grid, and using some pins, we're just going to line this up, let this, the paper just kind of relax. It'll kind of, fold up. And so we're going to mark the center, around the center first, and then we will find reference points here. Like this berry right here, where maybe where the stem joins the berry. We'll do that too. And so we're going to pin this just around the perimeter. We're not going to worry about everything, but we're going to find the correct location and put a large pin. You can lift your pattern around the perimeter and find that area. And just let the paper bunch up. It will bunch up because we have, a quilted piece under here that the stitching drew it up a little bit. But we are now finding the finished edge of our quilt. So this has given us like a topographical map, but it also has given us a position for marking the outside edge of our quilt. Aren't you glad you didn't cut anything off of this? Because, the quilt had shrunk up, that we want to mark this edge carefully with a chalk outline around all four sides of the quilt. Okay. We've removed the working drawing from our quilt top now. And this is where we're going to be joining the units. You can see our chalk perimeter that we marked. But now this area where we're going to join, we're going to pull that back, the batting and the backing. We're going to pull it back from the quilt top. That's the quilt top with the French Fuse foundation. And we're going to just join the top of the top to the whole side unit, but we want to get the back and the batting out of the way at this point. And I'm just going to use some big safety pins because I don't want to poke myself with a pin when I'm stitching the top. Right here we pinned the backing and the batting back out of the way. We're just going to be working with the top of the quilt right now. We have our chalk line and our handy glue stick, and we're just going to glue kind of in an outward motion and fold it right on the finished edge of our quilt. It's right on that chalk line. We're just going to kind of even it out. And the glue stick makes it tacky so it'll hold it in position. Just do this in an outward motion and turn it back to our chalk line because that is the finished edge of our quilt. All right, we just press this back with glue stick, but now we're going to seal it down because let the iron just do its work for a minute, because we want a nice crisp edge for joining the units. And we turn this back on both opposite sides. We did the same thing with the working drawing for our side panel. We turned it back on the working edge. You see the other extra lines that we added, and we just taped it back. So the working drawing now just has the finished edge of the quilt. All right, this second topical map is our side piece, and we line this up at certain intersections in our design. You know, this point here, make sure it lined up. And we did it on all four sides. Now, this is the bottom finished edge of the quilt, and it really doesn't matter to mark that because that chalk is going to disappear. Chalk does rub off, but this line up here, the perimeter around the top where it's going to join the center unit, and the two sides were extremely important. And our chalk really wasn't showing up very good on the light color or the gold. So I'm using a water erasable pen there because this line is crucial. We need to make sure that we can see that when we're putting the pieces together. All right, now the short side of our quilt is marked with that finished edge of the quilt. And we're going to rotate this because we're joining it to this side, and then we're going to flip this over. We've got a nice crisp turned edge now, and I'm going to actually turn it this way so I can work on it a little easier. Just kind of hold it with my body. And now what we want to do is line up. This is stitched all the way to the edge. That package is all the way to the edge. And what we're going to do is just line up the top of the quilt. Everything else is turned back out of the way. This is the outside edge, this chalk mark right there, and we're going to line it up right there. So we're going to use a pin and pin that. So I'm going to come over here. Actually, what I'll do to find the center point is just go ahead and fold this in half like that and find a center point which will line up. We know that is a center line right there on the peak of that little square. So we'll pin that right there. See, that line there is the finished edge of that piece. So we're just gonna, that's a pretty thick seam there, so I'm gonna put a pin on either side of that. So use these great big long pins. So this is our finished edge to the finished edge. That's a turn back finished edge there. So now we're going to have to ease this in because, you know, when we quilted it, it you know, puckered up some of the quilt. So here we are. That's the finished edge that we line up with that finished edge. So I can just kind of sight that like that. So this isn't too bad. Look at that. We're just going to, I think the center was drawn up a little more than, so now we have to ease this back to the finish line. That's important that we follow the line. So I'm just kind of even this out. All right, now we've used long pins to pin the turned finished edge of the quilt to the whole body of the short side. You can see now what it looks like when we turn it over. We're going to just top stitch the top of our quilt to the whole side package with these other pieces turned back out of the way. We're going to take it to the sewing machine now and use a zigzag stitch with invisible thread on top and smoke the transparent thread because this is our dark red. Right now I've got my machine set at a zigzag stitch, 1.6. I have better luck. You could do this with straight stitching, but I think the zigzag stitch is stronger, and then I'm more secure about hitting the mark. So I try to center the center of the walking foot with my the top red fabric here. When you're using your walking foot, put your feed dogs up, because that helps move your quilt forward, and just kind of lift it up in front of you so you're not dragging the whole quilt. You want to be able to have this moving through. I'm going to back up just a little bit to make sure this end is secured. So I have the heads of these big pins out a long way, so I can just machine quilt right, or make stitch right over those straight pins. What's going on here? There. Because that's not stitched down yet, there's no sewing there. My foot kind of got caught there a little bit, so I had to just lift up the foot. Now I can continue. We've now top stitched just the top of the center unit to the whole side piece. And now we're going to remove these pins. Ready. Now we've turned it over, and we want to make sure this is pulled apart so it's laying flat on the table. We're going to remove our safety pins now. Now we're going to peel the backing away from the batting and just lay that flat. Keep this backing still out of the way until we're ready to use that. All right. Now what we're going to do is trim the batting so that it will lay flush in here. So I just have a sharp scissors, and I can just kind of feel that edge of the quilt. You can lift it too, but you can, with your scissors, feel the edge of the side unit. You're trimming the batting. See, this will lay down in there nice and flat. Now I'm going to turn this around this way. Okay, we've trimmed the batting so it's nice and flat in here, and that top stitching line is the finished edge of the quilt. And now we can just turn this and make it match that. We don't have to use glue stick or anything. We just want to bring it over till it's approximately in the center of that stitching line. We don't need glue stick or anything, but I'm just going to now pin that like that. All right, now this line here is our basting stitch that we did much earlier in this project, so that we left this 2-inch margin over for doing exactly what we're doing right now. That gave us plenty of room to make this seam, or the pieces of the quilt join together. Okay, this is real time with Ann and Rachel. We have just now joined the first 2 sections of our quilt. One of the short sides to the center section. So you saw us work. Now we ease this in again with long pins. We'll take it to the machine, and this time we're going to reverse our threads. We want to have the backing color thread on top, and then we're going to have smoke in the bottom, because it will be going mostly across this red area. You can see that's still the basting stitch that will come out after we've done that seam line, and then we'll have to take it to the machine and finish quilting that 2-inch margin. You see there's still not even any sewing in that 2 inches. All right, here we're sitting at the machine. We've reversed our threads. We're putting the thread that we're using on the backing on the top, and then our invisible thread, our smoke invisible thread, is in the bobbin. But now we do not have to thread the eye of that needle. The invisible thread in the bobbin is going to work just fine for this. I have a magic wand. My granddaughter made me this a few years ago, and I just like having it there. It gives me power. Now we're top stitching through all of the layers now. This is the turned backing on top of the seam that we created previously. So I just got to push these long pins out of the way. Just go ahead and move them out of the way. All right, now we're going to finish quilting this area, that approximate 2-inch area that we left open. So I've changed the threads again. I have the red color on the back to match the thread that we're using right now, and the smoke on the top. And I'm going to go ahead and zigzag these stitches, or those pattern pieces that needed to be stitched down. And now while we're right here, I'm just going to go ahead and finish quilting this area with free motion quilting. I put it on straight stitch, and I'm just going to kind of echo this shape. I didn't, I'm just going to go all the way up here. I left more than 2 inches open right here because I figured I'd just do that all at the same time when I'm doing this. I didn't want a hard edge along here, so you can just kind of free motion, go whatever direction moves you here. So you can see there's this area that we didn't stitch before, but just hang loose. We're just going to go over here and we can finish zigzagging that. This is kind of like everything's made up as we go, and so the stitches don't really matter because we're using invisible thread. Okay, as you're doing this, just make sure that you anchor down all these pieces that we hadn't stitched completely down before. So just kind of do whatever moves you. It's wonderful. With the invisible thread, you're just really adding texture. And when I travel someplace, I travel in the ditch between the pieces. I'm going to come up here and make sure I've anchored that down. I can do it with straight stitch or zigzag. Like I said, the stitches won't show. Doesn't really matter. So just enjoy the process and go with the flow.